the fall of 1974, a farmer outside Ames, Iowa, walked into his Oliver dealership and found the showroom empty. Not empty of customers, empty of Oliver tractors. The green machines were gone. In their place stood a line of tractors painted a color the company called Silver Mist, wearing a nameplate that read white. The Oliver sign above the service bay was still bolted to the wall. The parts counter still carried Oliver manuals, 3 shelves deep. The same mechanic who had replaced the hydraulic seals on the farmer's 882 winters ago was still behind the counter. But the machine on the floor was not the machine the farmer's father had bought in 1952. It was not the machine he himself had bought in 1963. It bore no green and cream. It carried no Charles City lineage. It was assembled in large part from the same Iowa castings on the same production floor by the same Charles City workforce. The engineering underneath the Silver Mist paint was Oliver's. The drawbar geometry was Oliver's. The transmission ratios were Oliver's. The name was not. A trucking conglomerate based in Cleveland, Ohio, had paid $99 million for the Oliver Corporation. In 1969, roughly $830 million in today's dollars, and had decided 5 years into ownership that carrying 2 names on the same tractor line cost more than carrying 1. The name that survived was the conglomerate's own. The name that did not was the one that had been on American farm equipment since 1929 and on Charles City iron since 1897. A decade before that showroom stood empty, Oliver had been shipping more than 30,000 tractors a year out of Charles City. The Oliver 88 was running on more Iowa farms than any competitor could name. The Oliver name meant something specific to a man who farmed row crops for a living. It meant a diesel that started in February, a hydraulic system that held pressure through April mud, a transmission that did not fail during the 11-day window a wet Iowa October sometimes gave you for corn harvest. But the real story of Oliver is not what White Motor Corporation did to the nameplate. It is the story of what happens to an engineering culture built over 70 years inside a single Iowa factory by men who understood what this specific soil did to a machine over 20 seasons of use, when the people who make the decisions stop being the people who made the machines. Every week on this channel, we tell the stories of American industrial brands that built something precise and lasting, and what the market or a balance sheet or a conglomerate in another state decided to do with it. Like the video and subscribe if that history matters to you. This story begins in Charles City, Iowa in 1897. Charles City, Iowa is a Floyd County farm town of 8,000 people set in the gently rolling till plain of the upper Midwest, where corn and soybeans have defined the agricultural economy since before the Civil War. It does not appear in many histories of American industry, but for the better part of a century, it was one of the most consequential factory towns in American agricultural equipment manufacturing because Charles City was where Hart and Parr built the machine they called a tractor before the word existed. Charles W. Hart and Charles H. Parr were mechanical engineering graduates of the University of Wisconsin, who founded the Hart-Parr Gasoline Engine Company in Charles City in 1897, initially producing stationary gas engines for the farm and light industrial market. By 1901, they had produced the first commercially successful American gasoline traction engine, a machine weighing 14 tons, producing 18 horsepower at the drawbar, capable of pulling a 6-bottom plow through Iowa clay that would have stopped a team of horses by noon. The drawbar, the horizontal steel bar at the rear of a traction machine to which field implements are hitched, was the measure of what a machine could actually pull under working conditions, not what its engine produced in isolation. Hart and Parr built to that measure from the beginning. The word tractor, a contraction of traction engine, entered American agricultural vocabulary from a Hart-Parr advertisement in 1906. The machine that coined the term was built in Charles City, Iowa, by 2 engineers who had decided the horse's era in American row crop farming was ending and that the internal combustion engine would replace it. They were correct on both counts, and they were there first. Hart-Parr grew steadily through the early 20th century. By 1918, the Charles City plant employed roughly 500 workers and was shipping traction engines across the American Midwest and into export markets in Canada and Argentina. The machines were large, heavy, and expensive, designed for breaking new ground for belt power threshing operations, for the scale of farming that the Great Plains demanded. What the American market was beginning to need by the mid-1920s was something different. A lighter, more maneuverable machine that could work between crop rows without destroying them. The row crop tractor, the machine that would define American Corn Belt farming for the next half-century, did not yet exist in a form that most American farm families could afford or operate. That gap in the market was the reason the merger of 1929 mattered. Oliver Farm Equipment Company was formed in April 1929 by the consolidation of 4 American agricultural equipment manufacturers. Hart Parr of Charles City brought the tractor engineering and the Iowa factory. The Oliver Chilled Plow Works of South Bend, Indiana, founded in 1855, the largest plow manufacturer in the United States, brought the brand name that carried the strongest recognition in the American farm dealer network. Nichols and Shepard of Battle Creek, Michigan, contributed threshing machine technology and a Midwest dealer presence. The American Seeding Machine Company of Springfield, Ohio, added planting equipment to the combined product line. The resulting company had factories in 4 states, distribution reaching every American farm county, and a product range that ran from seeders to threshers to the gasoline traction engines that Hart Parr had been building in Charles City for 32 years. The merged company took the Oliver name from the plow, Works the brand that dealers already knew and farm families already trusted, and made Charles City the center of its tractor engineering and production. That decision placed the mechanical heart of Oliver Farm Equipment in a factory town on the Cedar River in north-central Iowa, surrounded by the specific soil conditions, the specific crop cycles, and the specific operational demands of the farmers who would buy what Charles City built. The engineers who designed Oliver tractors lived in Floyd County. They knew what the ground asked of a machine. The product that established Oliver's identity for the post-war generation of American farmers was the Oliver 88, introduced in 1947. The 88 was a row crop tractor, a configuration in which the front wheels are set close together on a narrow tread or mounted on a single pivot point, allowing the machine to straddle a planted row of corn or soybeans and cultivate between rows without damaging the crop. Row crop capability was not a convenience feature in the American Corn Belt. It was the fundamental requirement. A tractor that could not navigate a standing crop could not do the work that Corn Belt farming demanded. The Oliver 88 ran a 6-cylinder gasoline engine producing approximately 42 horsepower, at the drawbar the most powerful standard row crop tractor in its class at introduction. The University of Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory, the American institution that independently tested every tractor sold in the United States under standardized field load conditions, and published the results in the Nebraska Tractor Test, reports that every serious farm buyer, consulted before signing a purchase order, assigned the Oliver 88 test number 398. The Nebraska test confirmed 38.7 horsepower at the drawbar under full load. That number was not a manufacturer's claim. It was a measured result from an independent American institution, and it meant something specific to a Floyd County farmer deciding between an Oliver and a John Deere. The list price for an Oliver 88 in 1948 was approximately $1,850, roughly $24,000 in today's money. For a family operation carrying land debt and equipment notes in post-war Iowa, that was not a casual purchase. American Agriculturist magazine reviewed the Oliver 88 in the spring of 1948 and called it the most capable row crop machine available from any American manufacturer at its price point. Farmers bought them. They bought them in Iowa and Illinois and Indiana and Ohio and Minnesota, across every state where the row crop farming system defined how a family lived and what a machine had to do to earn its place on the property. The Charles City factory that built the Oliver 88 employed approximately 500 workers by the early 1950s. The engineering department that designed it would spend the next 15 years refining what it had started, pushing the diesel technology, improving the hydraulic systems, extending the product line upward in horsepower to match the farms that were consolidating around them. The 88 was not the end of what Charles City could build. It was the proof that Charles City knew what American farming needed. And for a long while, that knowledge was enough. The machine that defined Oliver's commercial peak was not the 88 that launched the post-war era. It was the diesel, specifically the Oliver 880 diesel of 1958. And to understand what that machine meant to an American farmer in the late 1950s, it is necessary to understand what diesel fuel meant on a working farm. Diesel, a heavier distillate than gasoline, producing more energy per gallon, costing less per gallon, at the farm bulk tank, and carrying far less risk of the vapor ignition that had burned more than one American farm building to the ground, had been the power source of choice in heavy industrial equipment for 2 decades by 1950. Diesel locomotives, diesel construction equipment, diesel commercial trucks. The economics were not subtle. Diesel delivered more work per dollar spent every time in every application where the engine ran under sustained load. But row crop tractor diesels presented specific mechanical challenges that had kept most American farm equipment manufacturers cautious. Cold weather starting was unreliable without careful engineering. Higher compression ratios demanded stronger engine castings, heavier components that added weight to machines already pushing the limits of what an Iowa farm lane could support in spring mud season. And the dealer service networks that kept American farm equipment running had been trained on gasoline engines for 40 years. Diesel maintenance was a different discipline, and a dealer network that could not service what it sold was a distribution liability, not an asset. The Charles City Engineering Department understood all of this. The men who designed the Oliver diesel had spent careers learning what Floyd County clay and Corn Belt weather did to a machine across 20 years of daily use. They did not build to a specification written in a corporate office in Cleveland or Moline. They built to the operational reality of the farms. Their machines would work farms where a February cold snap meant the tractor had to start on the first attempt, where a hydraulic failure during spring planting could cost a farmer his planting window, where the transmission had to hold through the continuous load cycles of a 500-acre corn harvest without adjustment or complaint. The Oliver 880 diesel, introduced in 1958 and submitted to the University of Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory, that same year, as test number 649, delivered 50.3 horsepower at the drawbar on diesel fuel. The fuel consumption figures measured in horsepower hours per gallon. The standard metric of tractor efficiency in the Nebraska test sequence showed a 30% improvement over comparable gasoline engines running the same load. On a farm operation, running 3 tractors through a 500-acre corn and soybean season, that difference translated to approximately 4,000 fewer gallons of fuel consumed per year. At 1958, diesel prices of roughly 12 cents per gallon at the farm bulk tank, that was a saving of approximately $480 per season real money to a family operation carrying equipment notes and land debt into every planting year. The list price for an Oliver 880 in standard gasoline configuration was approximately $3,200 in 1958, roughly $34,000 today. The diesel variant listed at approximately $3,600, roughly $38,000 today. The closest competitor in the diesel row crop market was the John Deere 730 diesel, which the Nebraska laboratory tested at 51.5 horsepower at the drawbar, and which listed at approximately $3,800 in diesel configuration. John Deere had more horsepower at the drawbar. John Deere cost more. Oliver was $200 cheaper within rounding distance on the Nebraska numbers and mechanically simpler to service in a dealer network that was still building diesel competency through the late 1950s. An Oliver dealer in Ames or in Bloomington, Illinois, or in Lafayette, Indiana, did not need a sales script to sell the 880 diesel. He carried the Nebraska test report in his briefcase. He sat down at a farmer's kitchen table, opened the report to test number 649, and pointed at the fuel consumption column. The math did the rest. The distribution channel that carried Oliver's diesel breakthrough to the American farm market was not a single national account or a government contract. It was the company's own direct dealer network, approximately 800 independent Oliver farm equipment dealers across the United States, men who had sold Hart-Parr machines before the 1929 merger and who carried 50 years of institutional memory about what the Charles City brand meant and what its customers expected. That network reached every farm county in the Corn Belt, and the Great Plains, and the Mid-South cotton country. It was built dealer by dealer, county by county across half a century of farm equipment sales, and it was the infrastructure that no competitor could replicate quickly and no corporate consolidation could replace easily. What Oliver had built by 1960 was not primarily a technical advantage. John Deere's engineering was at least as capable. International Harvester's distribution network was larger. Alice Chalmers ran a competitive product line across the same horsepower classes. Oliver's advantage was institutional, the accumulated trust of farm families who had bought Hart-Parr machines in 1918 Oliver 70s in 1937 and Oliver 88S in 1948, and who returned to the same dealer in the same county seat to buy the next machine. That trust was not transferable, and it was not replaceable. It had been built one Nebraska test report and one February cold start and one hydraulic repair at 7 in the morning at a time. The nameplate on the hood was not a city of origin. It was a standing agreement between a factory in Iowa and a farm family who had decided over 3 generations that the Charles City engineers understood what their land required. By 1960, Oliver tractors were the specified equipment on an estimated 180,000 American farm operations concentrated across Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Minnesota, the core American Corn Belt states, where row crop capability and diesel fuel economy were the primary criteria for any equipment purchase. The Farm Equipment Institute, the American Trade Association for Agricultural Equipment Manufacturers, listed Oliver consistently among the top 5 American tractor producers by domestic market share throughout the 1950s. That market was shared with John Deere International Harvester Alice Chalmers and Massey Harris, each of them engineering capable, each of them with dealer networks built over decades. Oliver held its position because the Charles City Engineering Department kept producing machines that passed the Nebraska test at the top of their class, and because the dealer network that carried those machines to the farm gate had been doing so long enough that the relationship was no longer commercial. It was familial. That was the moat. And for a company that understood what it had built, it should have been enough. The decade between 1955 and 1965 was American agricultural equipment manufacturing at its institutional peak, and Oliver was near the center of it. The American farm was consolidating during these years at a rate that reshaped the entire equipment market. The family operations of 160 acres that had defined the Corn Belt in 1920 were merging into 400-acre, then 600-acre operations, as younger sons left for the cities as the economics of mechanized row crop production rewarded scale, and as the federal farm programs of the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations tied support payments to production volume. Larger operations needed more powerful machines. They needed tractors that could pull 8-row planters across 800 acres of Iowa topsoil inside the narrow planting window that spring weather allowed. They needed hydraulic systems, the circuits of pressurized oil that actuated a tractor's remote attachments, its 3-point hitch, its front loader, if equipped, that did not fail at the worst possible moment of the crop calendar. A hydraulic failure during corn planting in early May was not an inconvenience. It was a financial event. Oliver answered this demand with 2 machines that defined its peak years. The Oliver 1800 introduced in 1960 ran a 6-cylinder diesel engine, producing approximately 75 horsepower, at the drawbar nearly 50% more pulling force than the 880 it supplemented at the top of the product line. The University of Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory conducted test number 769 on the 1800 diesel in 1960 and confirmed 72.8 horsepower at the drawbar with fuel consumption figures that placed it among the most efficient machines in its horsepower class. The list price was approximately $5,600 in diesel configuration, roughly $58,000 in today's dollars. For a 600-acre Iowa corn and soybean operation that had been running an Oliver 880 since 1958, the 1800 was the next logical step. More power, the same Charles City engineering philosophy, the same dealer network, the same Nebraska test, credibility. The Oliver 1900 diesel followed in 1962. Nebraska test number 820 confirmed 84.1 horsepower at the drawbar. The 1900 was Oliver's first genuine large-frame tractor, a machine that moved the Charles City product line into the territory that the consolidating American Corn Belt demanded. A farm operation that had bought an Oliver 88 in 1948 and an Oliver 880 in 1958 now had a third logical step. The 1900 gave them the power to run 12-row equipment across the 800-acre fields that 2 decades of agricultural consolidation had assembled around them. The product line told a coherent story from one generation to the next, and the story was always the same: more, power, better fuel economy, same factory, same standards. The Charles City factory that produced these machines occupied approximately 1.4 million square feet of production floor along the Cedar River at its 1960s peak. Between 3000 and 4000 workers reported to that factory on a production day, machinists running the turning and milling operations that produced crankshafts and transmission gears to the tolerances the Nebraska test demanded. Foundry workers pouring the gray iron castings that became engine blocks, and differential housings assembly operators fitting the components together on a production line that had been running in one form or another since the Hart-Parr era. The machining operations at Charles City held tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, not because the engineering specifications required a standard that competitors could not match, but because the Charles City machinists had been holding those tolerances for so long that anything less was considered a production defect, not an acceptable variance. The foundry at Charles City was the physical heart of the operation. Gray iron, a casting alloy in which graphite is distributed through the iron matrix in a flake pattern that gives the material excellent compressive strength and vibration. Damping was the material from which Oliver built its engine blocks, its transmission cases, and its axle housings. A gray iron casting properly poured and properly machined would hold its dimensional accuracy under load for 20 years of field use. The Charles City foundry had been pouring those castings since 1901. The institutional knowledge of how to pour them correctly, the metallurgy, the mold preparation, the cooling rates, the inspection criteria was embedded in the workforce, passed from experienced foundry workers to apprentices across decades of continuous production. It was not written in a manual. It was carried in the hands of the men who did the work. The Oliver dealer network that carried these machines from the Charles City shipping dock to the American farm gate was a civic institution as much as a commercial one. An Oliver dealer in Charles City itself, or in Ames, or in Bloomington, Illinois, or in Lafayette, Indiana, was typically a man who had sold farm equipment in the same county for 20 years or more. He knew the farms in his territory by name. He knew which fields ran wet in April and which ones dried out early enough for an aggressive planting schedule. He knew which farmer ran his equipment hard and which one maintained it by the book. He extended credit through bad harvest years because he understood that the relationship was longer than any single transaction, and because the Oliver factory's warranty policies gave him the margin to absorb a difficult season without destroying his business. When a piece of Oliver equipment went down during planting, when a hydraulic pump failed at 6 in the morning, on a day when the soil temperature and the weather window aligned for the first time in 2 weeks, an Oliver dealer did not wait for a service appointment. He drove out. He had the parts on the truck. He had the machine running before noon because he understood that the 11-day window an Iowa May sometimes gave a farmer for corn planting was not a guideline. It was the entire margin between a profitable year and a break-even one. That service culture was not a marketing strategy. It was the operating reality of agricultural equipment dealership in the American Corn Belt, and Oliver had built its commercial position on it for 3 decades. That was what the green and cream meant on a Floyd County farm in 1962. Not a color preference, not brand loyalty in any abstract sense. A specific documented multi-generational record of machines that started when they needed to start, pulled what they needed to pull, and were fixed by men who arrived before the window closed. The machine that crystallized Oliver's peak, the product moment that defined what Charles City engineering could deliver when the engineering department was left to do its work, was not a tractor. It was a combine. And the story of what it did in one specific Iowa harvest season is the clearest measure of what Oliver had built and what would eventually be lost. The Oliver 55 self-propelled combine was introduced in 1947, the same year as the Oliver 88, and refined continuously through the 1950s. A self-propelled combine, a harvesting machine that moves under its own power rather than being pulled by a tractor, cuts the standing grain crop, separates the grain from the stalk and chaff inside its threshing cylinder and cleaning shoe, and delivers clean grain into an onboard tank for periodic unloading into a grain wagon or truck. The capacity of that onboard tank, the width of the cutting header, and the speed at which the machine could move through a standing crop without losing grain over the back of the cleaning shoe determined how many acres a single operator could harvest in a day. In a harvest season compressed by weather, acres per day was the only number that mattered. What Oliver's field engineering department had done with the 55 was specific and deliberate. The combine's header width, grain tank capacity, and unloading rate had been calibrated to match the throughput of an Oliver row crop tractor running a corn picker alongside. When a Floyd County farmer bought an Oliver 55 combine and an Oliver 88 tractor with a mounted corn picker, he was not buying two separate machines from the same catalog. He was buying a system one in which the harvest capacity of the combine matched the picking rate of the tractor, so that neither machine waited on the other, and neither operator stood idle while the other caught up. The capacity math had been done in Charles City by engineers who understood that harvest efficiency was a systems problem, not a machine problem. The harvest season that demonstrated what that system meant in operational terms was the Iowa corn harvest of 1958. October of that year brought sustained rainfall across the central corn belt that compressed the viable corn harvest window to approximately 11 days across Floyd and Cerro Gordo and Bremer counties. Corn left standing past its harvest window in wet conditions loses yield to field shelling, kernels dropping from the ear before the combine header can capture them, and to ear rot that begins when moisture content remains elevated past the point at which the grain should have been in the bin. In a normal October, a Corn Belt farmer had 3 to 4 weeks to bring his corn crop in. In October 1958, he had 11 days, and the ground was soft enough that heavy equipment risked getting stuck in the field before the job was finished. The farms running Oliver 55 combines with matched Oliver tractor corn pickers harvested their acreage inside that 11-day window. The system ran at the capacity for which it had been designed, and the capacity was sufficient. The farms that lost the window that ran mismatched equipment or equipment that broke down and waited 2 days for a dealer to arrive with parts or equipment that simply could not move fast enough through wet corn lost a measurable fraction of their yield to shelling and rot. The difference between a harvest completed and a harvest compromised in Floyd County in October 1958 was, in more than one case, the capacity-matched Oliver system running against the clock. This was not a marketing achievement. The Oliver 55 was not an icon or a trophy machine. It was a tool that worked when working was the only thing that mattered, and it worked because the engineering department in Charles City had done the capacity arithmetic before the machine left the drawing board. That was what precision manufacturing meant in the context of American agricultural equipment. Not tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, but systems designed to the operational reality of the farms that would use them by engineers who understood that reality because they lived inside it. By 1965, Oliver Corporation reported American tractor and equipment sales of approximately $180 million annually, roughly $1.75 billion in today's dollars. The company employed approximately 500 workers across all American manufacturing operations, with Charles City carrying the largest concentration. The Oliver dealer network numbered approximately 2,600 in the United States and 400 in Canada. Oliver held approximately 8% of the American tractor market, a position it had maintained for a decade behind John Deere at roughly 34%, and International Harvester at roughly 25%. But well ahead of the second tier of American farm equipment manufacturers who were already beginning to feel the pressure of a consolidating market and a shifting competitive landscape. 8% of the American tractor market in 1965 was not a dominant position, but it was a stable one held by a company with sound engineering, a loyal dealer network, a financially conservative management culture, and a factory in Charles City that had been producing agricultural equipment continuously since 1897. Oliver was not the largest American farm equipment company. It was not the most aggressive. It was not the most innovative in the sense of chasing every new technology that appeared at the Farm Equipment Institute's annual show. It was a company that built good machines, supported them well, and sold them through a dealer network that had earned the trust of Corn Belt farming families across 2 generations. That institutional stability, the 68-year accumulation of engineering knowledge, dealer relationships, and farm family trust, was the asset that made Oliver worth $99 million to a Cleveland trucking conglomerate in 1969. It was also in the deepest sense the asset that the acquisition would destroy, not immediately, not visibly, but with the certainty of a process that begins the moment the men making the financial decisions stop being the men who understand what they have purchased. The green and cream was still on the tractors in 1969. The Charles City foundry was still pouring iron. The dealer in Ames was still driving out at 6 in the morning when a machine went down before planting. But the clock had started. The American farm equipment industry had been consolidating since the mid-1950s, and Oliver's management understood the pressure. John Deere's new generation tractors launched in August 1960 at a dealer event in Dallas that drew over 5,000 dealers from across the country and became one of the most celebrated product introductions in American agricultural history, had reset the competitive standard for every American row crop manufacturer simultaneously. The new generation machines, the 3010, the 4010, and the subsequent series that followed, offered power levels, operator comfort, and hydraulic capability that moved the benchmark forward in every dimension at once. John Deere had spent 8 years and an estimated $50 million developing the new generation line in secret, and when it appeared on the Dallas stage in 1960, every other American farm equipment manufacturer faced the same calculation: match it or concede ground. John Deere's market share response was immediate and sustained. From roughly 23% of the American tractor market in 1959, John Deere climbed to over 34% by 1964. International Harvester held approximately 25%. Allis-Chalmers, Minneapolis, Moline, and Oliver competed for the remainder of a market that was simultaneously growing in total horsepower demand and shrinking in total unit volume as farm consolidation reduced the number of buyers even as it increased the size of what each buyer needed. Oliver's answer to the new generation was the 1800 and 1900 series sound machines, well-engineered, competitive at their Nebraska test numbers, and carried by a dealer network that still commanded loyalty in the Corn Belt counties where Oliver had been selling since the Hart-Parr era. But the 1800 and 1900 were not the category redefining leap that the market had been shown was possible. The Charles City Engineering Department had the technical capability to make that leap. What it did not have and would not have after 1969 was the capital budget and the organizational autonomy to execute it. The acquisition changed everything, and it changed everything before most Oliver dealers or Oliver customers understood that anything had changed at all. White Motor Corporation of Cleveland, Ohio, was a commercial truck manufacturer. Its core competency was the production of heavy-duty highway trucks for the American freight industry, long-haul tractors, heavy-duty cab-over-engine designs, the working vehicles of the American interstate commerce system. White had been in the truck business since 1900 and had built a respectable position in the commercial vehicle market. What it had not built was any meaningful expertise in agricultural equipment engineering, farm dealer network management, or the specific operational culture of the American Corn Belt farm supply chain. White had been assembling a farm equipment portfolio through acquisition for most of the 1960s. It had acquired Cockshut Farm Equipment of Brantford, Ontario in 1962, a Canadian manufacturer with a modest American dealer presence. It had acquired Minneapolis Moline of Hopkins, Minnesota in 1963, a legitimate American farm equipment manufacturer with its own engineering tradition, its own dealer network, and its own loyal customer base in the Northern Plains states. By the time White made its offer for Oliver in 1969, it was assembling what it characterized as a rationalized multi-brand farm equipment operation that would share engineering share components and leverage the combined dealer networks of 3 established American brands into a position competitive with John Deere and International Harvester. The logic was conglomerate consolidation economics, and on a spreadsheet it was coherent. 3 brands sharing a transmission design saved tooling costs. 3 brands sharing a dealer territory reduced the overhead of duplicated service infrastructure. 3 engineering departments producing overlapping products could be combined into 1 engineering department producing a unified line. The savings were real. The spreadsheet was accurate as far as it went. What the spreadsheet did not capture was what Oliver's $99 million purchase price actually represented. It was not the Charles City factory. It was not the current product line. It was not the dealer network measured as a count of signed dealer agreements. It was 72 years of accumulated institutional knowledge, the Charles City foundry workers who knew how to pour a gray iron casting that would hold its dimensions for 20 years of field use, the engineering department that had calibrated diesel fuel economy to the specific duty cycles of Iowa row crop farming, the dealer in Ames who knew that the Hendersons on County Road B12 ran their equipment hard and needed a service call within 4 hours when something went down during planting. None of that appeared on the balance sheet. None of it survived the consolidation intact. White's post-acquisition management began the rationalization process almost immediately. The Oliver Minneapolis Moline and Cockshut engineering departments were progressively merged. Component sharing across the three brands was mandated where feasible, which in practice meant that the machines bearing the Oliver nameplate increasingly shared powertrains and hydraulic components, with machines bearing the Minneapolis Moline nameplate products designed for a different farming region, a different customer base, and a different operational context than the Corn Belt row crop market that Oliver had spent 4 decades engineering for specifically. Oliver dealers in Iowa were asked to stock Minneapolis Moline products alongside Oliver machines. Their customers had not asked for Minneapolis Moline, they did not buy it. The Oliver tractors produced between 1969 and 1974. The 1755, the 1855, and the 1955 were the last generation to carry the Oliver name, and they were by the Nebraska test numbers good machines. The Oliver 1855 diesel, submitted to the Nebraska laboratory as test number 1027 in 1969, delivered 86.5 horsepower at the drawbar. The Oliver 1955 diesel tested at 106.2 horsepower at the drawbar. The most powerful row crop tractor the Charles City factory had ever produced under the Oliver name. The engineering was sound. The Charles City production floor was capable. The machines could compete on the Nebraska numbers with anything John Deere or International Harvester was producing in the same horsepower classes. But a competitive Nebraska test number required a dealer network willing to put the machine in front of a farmer, and a farmer willing to walk into the dealership, and a dealership that still carried the brand with conviction. All three of those conditions were beginning to erode by 1972, and none of them could be restored by a good test result alone. The announcement came in 1974. White Motor Corporation declared that its three farm equipment brands Oliver Minneapolis, Moline, and Cockshut would be consolidated under a single unified identity, White Farm Equipment. The new machines would be painted a color the company designated Silver Mist. The styling would be determined by industrial design consultants rather than by the Charles City engineering department. The Oliver name, the green and cream, the Hartpar bloodline, the 77 years of Charles City iron would be retired from the tractor hood. The decision was presented as a rationalization. One brand was cheaper to market than three. One color was cheaper to paint than three. One dealer identity was simpler to manage than three overlapping networks serving partially overlapping territories. The arithmetic was defensible. The arithmetic was also in the specific context of the American Corn Belt farm equipment market, a catastrophic misreading of what the Oliver name represented to the people who had been buying it for 2 generations. A farmer in Floyd County, Iowa, in 1974 did not buy a tractor brand. He bought a relationship with the Charles City factory that had built the machine with the dealer in the county seat who had serviced it, and with the 3 generations of his own family who had run Oliver iron across the same fields since his grandfather's time. When the Silver Mist White Farm equipment machine appeared in the showroom where the green and cream Oliver had stood, the relationship was not transferred. It was severed. The new machine might carry Oliver castings under its sheet metal. It might run Oliver transmission ratios through its drivetrain. But the farmer standing in the showroom in 1974 did not see continuity. He saw a stranger wearing his neighbor's coat. The dealer network felt it first. Oliver dealers who had built their businesses on the green and cream brand faced a choice that White Motor's consolidation strategy had not adequately considered: carry the Silver Mist White Farm equipment line with the same conviction they had carried Oliver, or begin the process of evaluating alternatives. Many attempted the former. The customers who walked in asking for Oliver parts received silver mist machines and were told the engineering was the same. Some accepted that. More did not. John Deere dealers in the same counties had no such problem. Their machines were still green and yellow. Their brand had not changed its name. Their customers walked in knowing exactly what they were buying and walked out with exactly what they had expected. The American farm itself was accelerating the pressure from a different direction simultaneously. In 1950, there were approximately 5.6 million American farm operations. By 1970, that number had fallen to 2.9 million. By 1980, it would fall further to 2.4 million. The farms were larger, the consolidating operations that survived needed more powerful machines, and Oliver's 1800 and 1900 series and their white farm equipment successors were capable of serving that demand. But there were fewer buyers. A dealer who had sold 30 tractors a year in 1960 was selling 18 in 1975. The inventory carrying costs, the service infrastructure investment, and the training requirements for a modern farm equipment dealership did not scale down proportionally with unit volume. Dealers who could not sustain the investment on declining volume began evaluating which lines they could afford to carry and which they could not. A white farm equipment dealership in 1975 required a dealer to stock parts and maintain service competency for 3 formerly separate product lines: Oliver, Minneapolis, Moline, and Cockshut, now unified under a single brand identity but still mechanically distinct in their legacy product populations. The Oliver 880S and 1800s that Corn Belt farmers were still running required parts and service expertise that the Minneapolis Moline product line did not share. The dealer who had spent 20 years mastering Oliver service now carried the additional burden of Minneapolis Moline legacy support without a corresponding increase in new machine sales volume to justify the investment. The specific sequence of what followed was not a collapse. It was an attrition steady, measurable, and in retrospect inevitable from the moment the silver mist paint replaced the green and cream. White Motor Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in September 1980. The causes were primarily in the truck division. The commercial vehicle market had contracted sharply in the recession of 1979 and 1980, and White's debt load from its acquisition spree of the 1960s left it without the financial flexibility to absorb the downturn. The farm equipment division was operationally separate but financially entangled. When the parent company entered bankruptcy, White Farm Equipment entered a period of ownership uncertainty that further eroded the dealer confidence and customer trust that the Silver Mist consolidation had already damaged. White Farm Equipment was sold out of the White Motor bankruptcy to TIC Texas Investment Corporation, which continued production in Charles City in limited and diminishing form through the early 1980s. Allied Products Corporation of Chicago acquired White Farm Equipment in 1987 and continued the brand through the remainder of the decade under conditions that bore no resemblance to the manufacturing operation that Oliver had run at its peak. The engineering department that had calibrated diesel fuel economy to Floyd County soil conditions was gone. The foundry expertise that had poured gray iron castings to 20-year dimensional standards was dispersed. The dealer network that had driven out at 6 in the morning when a machine went down during planting had contracted to a fraction of its former coverage. The Charles City tractor plant closed permanently in 1993. Approximately 3,200 direct manufacturing jobs in Charles City, Iowa, were eliminated across the sequence of reductions from 1975 to 1993. The Cedar River frontage that had received coal barges for the factory's power plant fell silent. The production floors where Hartpar had built the first American gasoline traction engine in 1901 went dark. The last machine left the shipping dock. The foundry fire went out. The engineering department dispersed without replacements. The dealer signs came down across the Corn Belt. The Oliver name disappeared from new production. The green and cream existed only on machines already in the field. The company did not. The Oliver name did not vanish entirely from the American agricultural equipment market. It passed through the successive corporate transactions that followed White Motor's 1980 bankruptcy into the hands of AGCO Corporation, the American Agricultural Equipment Holding Company formed in 1990 from the acquisition of Deutz Alles, and subsequently expanded through the purchase of Massey Ferguson Fendt and other established farm equipment brands. AGCO continues to produce equipment under the White Planter's name in a limited product range focused on planting technology. The Oliver name itself does not appear on current production. It belongs to the historical record, not the dealer floor. But the machines belong to the farms. And on American farms, they have outlasted every corporate transaction that passed the name from one balance sheet to another. The secondary market for Oliver tractors in the United States is not a nostalgia market. It is a working market maintained by a community of collectors, restorers, and active farm operators who understand precisely what they are purchasing and why the purchase makes operational sense. The Oliver Collectors Association, with membership concentrated across the former Oliver dealer territories of the American Corn Belt, maintains an active network of parts suppliers, technical resources, and regional show events that keep the Charles City machines running decades after the factory that built them closed. The organization's membership skews heavily toward the 55 to 70 age demographic men and women who either operated these machines in their working lives or grew up watching a father or grandfather run them across the same fields the machines now work in retirement. Antique Power Magazine, the American publication serving the vintage farm equipment community, carries Oliver coverage in nearly every issue. The readership that sustains that coverage is the same demographic that drove past an Oliver dealership on the way to school in 1962 and understood even then that the green and cream machines behind the showroom glass represented something specific about the county they grew up in and the farming culture that shaped it. At American farm equipment auctions, Maycomb Auctions Gone Farmin' Series Almond Vintage Power Auctions, held annually in Nokomis, Illinois, Purple Wave equipment auctions reaching buyers across the central Corn Belt. Oliver tractors in original or restored condition command prices that reflect genuine market demand rather than collector speculation. A restored Oliver 1855 diesel in full working condition brought $14,500 at an Almond auction in 2022. A running Oliver Super 88 in original green and cream paint, the Charles City Foundry casting still legible on the engine block. The drawbar geometry unchanged from the Nebraska test configuration of 1954, brought $8,200 at an Iowa farm estate sale the same year. These are not the prices of machines displayed behind velvet ropes. They are the prices of machines that the buyers intend to start to operate and to maintain. The reason is functional and it is specific. An Oliver 880 or 1855 in sound mechanical condition holds its hydraulic system pressure without the electronic management systems that modern equipment requires for basic operation. It starts in cold weather without a preheat cycle governed by a controller module that a rural Iowa parts supplier may or may not stock. It can be diagnosed with hand tools and a service manual repaired with components sourced from the Oliver Tractor Parts aftermarket network that has supplied the Charles City machines since the 1990s, and returned to field service without a dealership service appointment or a proprietary diagnostic interface. The Charles City engineering philosophy that a farmer in Floyd County in February with the nearest parts supplier 40 miles away and a machine down before spring planting needed to fix it himself with what he had on hand is embedded in every system on every machine the factory produced. That philosophy did not expire when the factory closed. It is still operational in the machines themselves. The physical address of the Charles City factory, 300 North Main Street, Charles City, Iowa, is today partially occupied by light industrial tenants and partially vacant. The Cedar River frontage that once received coal barges for the factory's steam power plant is a municipal green space maintained by the city that the factory sustained for nearly a century, and that the factory's closure left diminished in ways that a municipal park does not adequately address. The foundry building where the gray iron castings were poured that became the engine blocks of every Oliver tractor ever produced in America was demolished in 1998. A section of the original 1920s machine shop structure still stands on the site. It does not carry the Oliver name. It carries no name at all. The surprise that the Oliver story contains the detail that reframes the entire arc from Hartpar's first gasoline traction engine in 1901 to the Charles City plant's closure in 1993 is not found in a corporate archive or an auction result. It is found on a working grain farm in Humboldt County, Iowa, approximately 60 miles southwest of Charles City. On that farm, a 1973 Oliver 1955. Diesel is an active production service. The machine carries 14,000 hours on its original engine block, the same block that left the Charles City assembly floor in the year before White Motor retired the Oliver name from new production. The current operator learned to adjust its injection pump timing from his father, who purchased the machine new in 1973, and who learned its service requirements from the Oliver dealer who sold it to him. The machine has been offered $22,000 by buyers who recognized its condition and its provenance. The offer has been declined. The Oliver 1955 plants 100 acres of corn and soybeans in Humboldt County every spring. It has not left Floyd County's neighboring watershed in 50 years. It does not require a diagnostic interface or a controller module or a dealer service appointment. It requires a competent operator, a supply of diesel fuel, and the injection pump timing specification that an Oliver dealer wrote in a service manual in 1973, and that a Humboldt County farmer has been following ever since. The machine outlasted the company by 30 years. It is still working. What the Oliver story reveals about American industrial culture is not comfortable, and it does not resolve into a simple lesson about foreign competition or technological disruption. Oliver was not defeated by German precision engineering. It was not displaced by Japanese price-to-performance economics. It was not rendered obsolete by a technology transition it failed to anticipate. It was purchased by a Cleveland trucking conglomerate that valued its dealer network and its market share as balance sheet assets, that paid $99 million for the accumulated institutional trust of 3 farm generations, and that discovered too late and at considerable cost to the 200 people who worked in Charles City that institutional trust is not a transferable asset. It does not move with the nameplate. It does not survive a coat of silver mist paint. It lives in the relationship between a factory and the farms it has served long enough that the service is no longer commercial. It is something closer to obligation. Americans say they value American-made equipment. They say they value agricultural heritage, precision manufacturing, the engineering culture of the Corn Belt factory town. The Oliver Collectors Association has thousands of members. Restored Oliver tractors draw larger crowds at Midwest farm shows than almost any other vintage brand. The Green and Cream is recognized immediately by anyone over 55 who grew up within 20 miles of an Iowa farm. The emotional attachment is genuine and it is documented. And yet, when White Motor's consolidation strategy presented the Oliver dealer network with silver mist machines in 1974, most of the network carried them. When the Charles City workforce was reduced through the late 1970s and early 1980s, there was no sustained public effort to reverse it. When the plant closed in 1993, the Corn Belt farm families who had bought Oliver machines for 3 generations were already running John Deere. The mathematics of farm operation do not wait for institutional loyalty to find its footing. The dealer was gone. The parts network was thinning. The next machine came from Moline, not Charles City, and it worked, and the corn got planted. The machines outlasted the company. The company could not outlast the balance sheet. That is the difference between what Charles City built and what White Motor purchased. And it is the distance measured in 30 years of continuing operation on a Humboldt County farm between a machine made to last and a conglomerate made to extract. Somewhere in Humboldt County, Iowa, a 1973 Oliver 1955. Diesel with 14,000 hours on the original block is running a 12-row corn planter across ground that has been farmed by the same family since before Hart and Parr built their first traction engine on the Cedar River. The green paint faded to the color of an Iowa field. Just before rain, the Charles City nameplate on the hood still legible, still facing the soil, it has planted every April for 50 years on a farm that no factory currently operating in the United States was built in the same way to the same constraints by the same hands to serve. See you in the next one.